anointed one, the Messiah who would usher in the everlasting kingdom promised to his ancestor Abraham. But although he was a great king, his life ended in faithless disobedience to God. But there will be a king who will come 1,000 years after David. He will be born in Bethlehem like David was. He will be hunted down by the current king like David was. And he will be a priest king like David was, except this priest will also become the sacrifice for not only David's sin and the nation of Israel, but for the sin of the entire world for all eternity, including you and me. To learn about the life of this king, the true anointed Messiah, who, unlike David, never failed once, check out this video here.
That's the woman. Welcome to Yogi Marquis Reviews. Right now, we're going to do Inside the NBA. The Inside the NBA reacts to the Rockets versus Warriors game. We're going to do Inside the NBA. Welcome to Yogi Marquis Reviews. Today, we're going to watch. Hello. Welcome to Yogi Marquis Reacts. Today we're going to pop in with the Inside the NBA reacts to the Rockets versus Warrior Game 4 highlights. So I'm going to react to them reacting. Because Shaq and Chuck are hilarious. And Kenny's awesome. And so is, Tony. Well, everybody's awesome. I love everybody.
Ooh, that was some Game 4 in San Francisco between the Warriors and the Houston Rockets as we welcome you inside the NBA presented by Kia. Live from Studio J here in Atlanta. Ernie Johnson with Shaq and Kenny and Chuck.
It's Ernie. I forgot Ernie's name. I should know Ernie's name, but I forgot Ernie's name. I don't know why I should know Ernie's name, but I guess I did. Let's go.
Pajimski, play well.
I love Shaq. And I love that he got on Money Green, because Shaq is Dr. Shaq. I mean, we should all call him Dr. Shaquille O'Neal. But let's keep going. All right, NBA, it's time for y'all to calm down. This is it's not supposed to look like 80s basketball, y'all. Come on. It's a game of skill. Boxing is the game that looks like the skill some of these folks trying to play down in Houston and in Detroit. However, guys, let's settle it down. I can't tell if it was an accident or not, but, Draymond is finally happy to have another Draymond on the squad so that when Draymond get in trouble early, well, business still can get handled. Go ahead, Jimmy. We're going to see that in a little while.
Got a technical in the game and then a flagrant in the game. You got Jimmy Butler and Dylan Brooks. Yeah, so looks like he's got a big laugh and then they forget the serious. And then
I gotta watch that play again because that was pretty beautiful. He just kind of We're gonna no, actually we're not gonna back it up, but we're gonna wow. Like later on, I gotta watch that again because that wow. Watching about this new Warriors lineup is that Jimmy has given the he has allowed Steph to Jimmy has allowed all of the rest of the Golden State Warriors to play with different parts of their game back. Everybody's trying that whole Jimmy jump toss thing, but you see it allows Draymond to be able to, instead of just looking to pass the ball, he's popping his three because sometimes Jimmy comes in the middle and just handles the game and moves everybody around, and everybody is there to do their part. And in a way, if you think of it, the Golden State Warriors, if you just let Jimmy run the show, it's like take out Bam Adebayo and swap in All Star, Hall of Famer, multiple ring winner Draymond Green for Bam Adebayo. And then you say, okay, we're gonna get rid of Tyler Hero or whatever point guard, Terry Rozier folk that they have, and swap in the greatest shooter of all time. Okay. Yeah, you got Spo, but you also have Steve Kerr, Olympic gold medal winning, I don't know what, 8 championship ring wearing Steve Kerr. Steve Kerr, the literal sharpshooter for Michael Jordan and Tim Duncan for multiple chips. So it's one of those things where you see that what Jimmy did was upgrade his whole real estate. And then Jimmy has used his man game to teach everybody on Golden State how to draw fouls, how to actually use your body for contact and finish through contact and play the way Jimmy does all the time. It's pretty spectacular to watch. There's a lot. Sometimes you ever notice that teams that really do well almost have players that become like they look like the coach. The coach is actually coaching through them, almost like they're channeling them. Like Steve Kerr is definitely he wants Steph Curry in the game because it's like, okay, well, if God made me a little bit blacker, a little bit faster, a little bit better, I'd be Steph Curry. If they let Steve Kerr shoot all the time and Steve Kerr's dad was Del Curry, then you essentially have Michael Jordan's and Tim Duncan's favorite sharpshooter drawing up plays for Del Curry's kid. So it's like you have this thing where Ime Udoka has this like really he was a basket, he played ball. And he took that kind of powerhouse demeanor to the Celtics and raised up Jalen and Jason for for that little run that they were going to do. And then Joe Mazzulla took him over, and Joe was kind of sweetheart. Man of God. Like, if you call Joe, he will bring it back to God every time. Like, oh, hey, Joe, tell us about the pick and roll. Joe Mazzulla was like, well, I was picking on my knees some cotton. And then I started rolling around in prayer with God. And we put it up through the rim. And God caught it and made the basket. Thank God. So, Joe Mazzulla, all right, I just exaggerated a lot of Joe Mazzulla. That ain't how he does it all the way, but, jokes. But Ime Udoka has basically Dylan Brooks. And they're like walking around like the meanies. Like he walks around like, I poke bears. No. Like they stole him off Memphis. Ime took all of Memphis muscle and brought it down to Houston and lit up the rocket. And now Memphis just got, ain't nobody that got Ja back. Ja just getting raffle stomped and they ain't got nobody muscle no more. I mean, they got a lot of firepower over there. It's like everybody's saying they got firepower. But Dylan Brooks is kind of that, modern day crazy that you need. That crazy. It ain't working so well because, it's like the Warriors got Dylan Brooks plus, and Draymond, and Dylan Brooks plus, MJ slash Flash D Wade's inside game, old man game, plus that bruising mentality. Wait, now look at this. Look at the stat line. Jimmy is real efficient with that basketball in the fourth quarter. Like, y'all don't get this. Y'all know what playoff Jimmy is? Playoff Jimmy is the fact that Jimmy Butler is energy. And see, so during the course of the season, he knows there's 82 games and he needs to make it through. And he's going to get to the playoffs. And if he's got to make it to the NBA Finals, you've got to stretch all that out. And Jimmy old. And Jimmy was never blessed with all the same quick twitch stuff that folks got. That's why Jimmy was like the last pick in the NBA draft, right around for the like MVP D Rose stretch with the Bulls, with D Rose, Taj Gibson, Blue Alding, Joakim Noah. It was like that team was all defense and Derrick Rose. And Tom Thibodeau was the coach of current New York Knicks. And Jimmy was basically, look, you 6'7", one of these days you might grow into something that we can feed to LeBron. We need 5 fouls for LeBron. Every team needs somebody 6'7" that might be able to one day take some fouls from LeBron. Because you can't stop him. You can't really slow him down. The man is cat quick, built like a Mack truck, with a mind like basketball Magnus Carlsen. That's LeBron James. And so every team needs a few Jimmys, wherever you can get them, especially if you're in the same division with the Cleveland Cavaliers, or you're going to be playing the Miami Heat when he moves down there. You need some folks that's going to take some fouls, just like when you played against Shaq, you needed some 7-footers to just stand there and take some fouls to make a little bit of an effort for Shaq. Make him have to take some free throws. So what playoff Jimmy does is in that energy, he is maximizing the types of shots he can get. He's maximizing the usage. As you can see, the rest of the team were taking a lot of more threes and a lot more misses. 8 misses. Jimmy took 1 3 and hit that bad. Jimmy took 7 shots. But Jimmy also has a thing where he tells the coach, like, look, regular season, y'all run the shot, but I think but when we get playoff time, and not even playoff time, just give me the fourth quarter. I'll figure out where I need to. If we need to stomp them out in the first quarter, we'll do that. If I need to hold on, do that. Jimmy has excellent old man game. It's like Houston just collecting goons. No, hold on, and I'm not meaning that insulting, guys. I mean that some of y'all know who y'all are. Get paid to just be kind of badass. That's what y'all do. So yeah, I think we're done with this game. Peace and blessings. All right, I'm trying to guide my cute puppy through here. The next thing we're gonna watch. Bible Project. Let's see.
At the end of the story of Adam and Eve, there's like a fall into history. Right? So in one way, history begins with the fall. But there's like a second fall, I think, with the flood in the Tower of Babel. And history, in an even more real sense, begins now. It begins with this story of Abraham. And we're no longer precisely in the realm of the purely mythical. That would be another way of thinking about it. We have an identifiable person who's part of an identifiable tribe, who's doing identifiable things. We're in the realm of history. And so history begins twice in the Old Testament. I suppose it begins again after Moses as well. But we've moved out of the domain of the purely mythical into the realm of history with the emergence of the stories about Abraham. This is from Aldous Huxley. So the first thing that I want to talk about in relationship to the Abrahamic stories is this idea of the experience of God, because Abraham, although quite identifiable as an actual individual, is also characterized by this peculiarity, and the peculiarity is that God manifests himself to Abraham, both as a voice but also as a presence. The stories never describe exactly how God manifests himself, except now and then he comes in the form of an angel. That's fairly concrete. But it's a funny thing that the author of, or authors of the Abrahamic stories seems to take the idea that God would make an appearance more or less for granted. And so, it's very, I think that part of the reason that I've struggled so much with the Abrahamic stories is because it's so hard to get a handle on that and to understand what that might mean. And so I'm going to hit it from a bunch of different perspectives, and we'll see if we can come up with some understanding of it. The first thing I'll do is tell you a story about a female neurologist whose name escapes me at the moment. She wrote a book called My Stroke of Insight. Jill Bolte, I think is her name. And she was a Harvard trained. She had medical training from Harvard in psychological function and knew a lot about hemispheric specialization. We talked a little bit about hemispheric specialization before. One of the ways of conceptualizing the difference between hemispheres is that the left hemisphere operates in known territory and the right hemisphere operates in unknown territory. That's one way of thinking about it. The left hemisphere operates in the orderly domain and the right hemisphere operates in the chaotic domain. Or the left hemisphere operates in the domain of detail and the right hemisphere operates in the domain of the large picture. It's something like that. Now, people differ in their neurological wiring, so those are overgeneralizations, but that's okay. We'll live with that for the time being. It's certainly not an overgeneralization to point out that you do, in fact, have two hemispheres and that their structures differ. And if the connections between them are cut, which could happen, for example, if you had surgery for intractable epilepsy, that each hemisphere would be capable of housing its own consciousness. That's been well documented by a neurologist named Izaniga, and Sperry, who did split brain experiments, must be 30 years ago now. So, and we know that the right and the left hemisphere are specialized for different functions. The right hemisphere, for example, seems to be more involved in the generation of negative emotion, and the left hemisphere more involved in the generation of positive emotion and approach. So the right hemisphere stops you and the left hemisphere moves you forward. Anyways, Bill Bolte, I hope I've got that right, had a stroke and maintained consciousness during the stroke and analyzed it while it was happening. And she was able, while it was happening, to hypothesize about what part of her brain was being destroyed. And so she had a congenital blood vessel malformation and had an aneurysm. And it just about killed her. But she said that it affected her left hemisphere. And she said that she experienced a sense of divine unity as a consequence of the stroke, because the left hemisphere function was disrupted and destroyed. And so she became right hemisphere dominant. And her experience of that was the dissolution of the specific ego into absolute consciousness, something like that. Now, that's only a case study, and you don't want to make too much of case studies, but there is an overwhelming amount of evidence that those two kinds of consciousness exist. One being your consciousness, localized and specified being, and the other being this capacity to experience oceanic dissolution and the sense of the cosmos being one. Now, why we have those capacities for different conscious experiences is very difficult to understand. I mean, part of me thinks that maybe we have a generic human brain. It's the brain of the species. And allied with that, we have a specific individual brain. And one is the left hemisphere and the other is the right hemisphere. The left hemisphere being the specific individual brain. And usually it's on and working because you obviously have to take care of yourself as a specific entity and not as a generalized cosmic phenomenon. It's hard to dice celery when you're a generalized cosmic phenomena, right? So you have to be more pointed than that. But look, let's make no mistake about it. The fact that those different states of consciousness exist is not disputable. They can be elicited in all sorts of ways. And so...
No. Stop it. Megan. Go back. Megan. Go back to... Okay, I'll care for your feet and stuff. I'll send this over. Let's see.
Will it speak to you with gentle words? Will it make an agreement with you for you to take it as your slave for life? Who is then able to stand against me? Who has a claim against me that I must pay? Everything under heaven belongs to me. Okay, so I'm going to read you something from the book of Job. And this is God harassing Job. So I don't know if you know the story of Job, but it's a very interesting story. And basically what happens with Job is that God and the devil have a bet, which seems a little, on the unreasonable side, but he gets to do whatever he wants. So he has a bet with Satan, roughly speaking. It says, well, Job, he tells Satan that Job is a good guy and that he's faithful to God. And Satan says, yeah, let me at him for a while until we can do something about that. And God says, roughly speaking, no, you can torture him all you want. He's going to stay faithful. And Satan says, well, we'll have a bet on that. And so God hands him over. And what happens to Job? It's like everything terrible that you can imagine then happens to Job, right? All his family dies. All his possessions are destroyed. He gets a horrible skin disease, and so then he's sitting there by the fire, sort of scraping himself with bits of broken pots, and all his friends come around and tell him that the reason all this happened to him was because he deserved it. So it's perfect, right? It's like an ultimate suffering story. It's a precursor to the idea of the crucifix. That's one way of thinking about it. And Job has a chat with God and asks him, like Cain did, roughly, what's going on? And God attempts to... He's irritated that Job would even dare to question him. It's like he's God. He gets to do whatever he wants. This is one of the things that God says to Job. Well, God is trying to justify himself, I would say, to Job. And the reason I'm telling you this, you see, is because imagine that you're trying to analyze a literary work. You might say, well, where's the meaning in the literary work? And the answer is, it's in the words, word by word. It's in the phrases. It's in the sentences. It's in the relationship of the sentences to each other. It's in the relationship of the sentences within paragraphs. It's in the relationship of the paragraphs within the contexts of the chapters. And it's in the relationship between the chapters and the whole book, and then the book in the whole culture. So you can't, it's not easy to localize the meaning. It exists at all those levels simultaneously, and they all inform one another. And what that means, and it's even worse in a book like the Bible. If you watch a movie and it's got a surprise ending, it changes the beginning. You thought the beginning was one thing, but it isn't. It's something else. Well, when you lay out a story, you can fiddle with the story anywhere in the story. And you can also make something that happens before dependent on something that happens after, which is very strange. And that's what's happened with the Bible, because people have worked on it, trying to synthesize it and make it coherent and make it make sense. And so they're continually connecting everything that's inside of it to everything else. And so you end up with a document map that looks like that. Now, so you think about that. Everything is connected to everything in that document. Not chaotically, but meaningfully, just like your brain is connected in a meaningful way. It's not, everything isn't connected to everything. It's connected in a meaningful way. And then you think, well, what do the stories mean? And then the answer is, well, that's a hard question, because all of them are connected with each other, and then there's all these different levels of analysis. And so you can pull out meanings at one level of analysis that aren't self-evident at another level of analysis. Just like if you're listening to a complex piece of symphonic music, you can follow a bass line, or you can follow the strings, or you can follow the horns, and they're all harmoniously interrelated, but they're also separable. There's an image that lurks in the Old Testament, and the image is the same image, it's roughly the same image as the image of Marduk confronting Tiamat. So, for example, at the beginning, God...
I see stadiums filled with happy people cheering on the victors. I see those same fans cheering up the second place winners. In this dreamscape, we are only one race, human. And however we identify is accepted as our way of being. I see a world so wonderful everyone wants to bring another life into. All of our institutions support the children and their parents. In that magical place, we don't see each as other. Every member of humanity, insect, or animal is respected and existed for a right. No reason to steal because everyone has a surplus. Our science and technology is focused on sustaining the planet and health. When I open my eyes, I smile because I see how close we are to the truth. Each day we produce and consume so much food past generation experience. Rather than starving, more people die of illnesses linked to overeating. We use our time to numb our mind with drugs, drink, and gambling. In the palm of our hand sits access to the wisdom of every leader through history. The flick of a finger delivers food and goods to our doorstep in the near term. We have more toys and choices than any of our ancestors could ever desire. We also have more anger, more stress, and suicide rates. I'm tired. I wish everyone could experience living in a world filled with peace, where everyone is accepted as their highest self and the antipathy is ceased. I wish we could share the attitude with gratitude and enjoy the smile of our life. I wish we could forgive our grievances to be free to give and receive God's grace. I wish our media showed programming that rewards kindness and forgiveness, instead of tuning in for ruthless backstabbing and unrepentant victims. The truth is, we are here knocking on the door to a world filled with peace. Will we have the courage to open it, or will we let peace win?
Here's how the beginning goes. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Okay, so we got to look at the first few lines here. So this is God justifying himself to Job. He says, "Can you pull in Leviathan with a fishhook?" or tie down its tongue with a rope? Can you put a cord through its nose or pierce its jaw with a hook? Will it keep you begging for mercy? Will it speak to you with gentle words? Will it make an agreement with you for you to take it as your slave for life? Can you make a pet of it like a bird or put it on for the young women in your house? Will traders barter for it? Will they divide it up among the merchants? Can you fill its hide with harpoons or its head with fishing spears? If you lay a hand on it, you will remember the struggle and never do it again. Any hope of subduing it is false. The mere sight of it is overpowering. No one is fierce enough to rouse it. Who is then able to stand against me? Who has a claim against me that I must pay? Everything under heaven belongs to me. I will not fail to speak of Leviathan's limbs, its strength and its graceful form. Who can strip off its outer coat? Who can penetrate its double coat of armor? Who dares open the doors of its mouth? Its back has rows of shields tightly sealed together. Each is so close to the next that no air can pass between. They are joined fast to one another. They cling together and cannot be parted. Its snorting throws out flashes of light. Its eyes are like the rays of dawn. Flames stream from its mouth. Sparks of fire shoot out. Smoke pours from its nostrils as from a boiling pot over burning reeds. Its breath sets coals ablaze and flames dart from its mouth. Strength resides in its neck. Dismay goes before it. The folds of its flesh are tightly joined. They are firm and immovable. Its chest is as hard as rock, hard as a lower millstone. When it rises up, the mighty are terrified. They retreat before its thrashing. The sword that reaches it has no effect, nor does the spear or the dart or the javelin. Iron it treats like straw and bronze like a rotten wood. Arrows do not make it flee. Sling stones are like chaff to it. A club seems to it but a piece of straw. It laughs at the rattling of the lance. Its undersides are jagged potsherds, leaving a trail in the mud like a threshing sledge. It makes the depths churn like a boiling cauldron and stees up the sea like a pot of ointment. It leaves a glistening wake behind it. One would think the deep had white hair. Nothing on earth is its equal, a creature without fear. It looks down on all that are haughty and is king over all that are proud. Well, so what's God doing? He's describing what he defeated in order to create the world. That's Marduk and Tiamat. Okay, so that's one reference like that. All right, so now another reference like that. This is from Psalms 74. Yet God is my king of old, working salvation in the midst of the earth. Thou didst break the sea in pieces by thy strength. Thou didst shatter the heads of the sea monsters in the waters. Thou didst crush the heads of Leviathan. Right, that's the creature that we just heard described. Thou gavest him to be food to the folk inhabiting the wilderness. Now you remember, so when Marduk defeats Tiamat, he cuts her into pieces and makes the world out of her pieces. And here what's happening is that the force that encounters the Leviathan is able to break it into pieces and feed everyone with it. Now, the reason I'm telling you that in relationship to this is because, and the earth was one without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. Let me tell you a little bit about that. Those lines, before God begins to create, the world is tohu wabohu. That's from the Hebrew. The word tohu by itself means emptiness or futility. So there's a psychological element to that, eh? And that emptiness or futility in some sense is what you confront when you're trying to extract your life from the world. It is used to describe the desert wilderness as well. Tohu wabohu, chaos, is the condition that bara, ordering, remedies. Okay, so there's the idea in the first verses that this initial chaos is being ordered, and the order is what makes the world. So it's standard cosmology. Order emerges out of chaos, and the thing that makes it emerge is the word of God. Darkness and deep, which is tehom in Hebrew, are two of the three elements of the chaos represented in tohu wabohu. The third is the formless earth. In the Enuma Elish, the deep is personified as the goddess Tiamat, the enemy of Marduk. Here it is the formless body of primeval water surrounding the habitable world. Okay, so but we know Tehom and Tiamat are the same word, or at least Tehom is derived from Tiamat. So the idea that's presented at the beginning of Genesis is the same. It's an abstracted and psychologized representation of the story that the Mesopotamians put forward. So Yahweh is Marduk, roughly speaking, going out and conquering the dragon of chaos and making order out of it. And then there are these allusions later, say in Job and in the Psalms, of him doing exactly that, conquering a primordial monster and making the world out of its pieces. Well, so what does that mean exactly? Well, it means that the highest ordering principle is the spirit that goes out into the darkness or the deep, that encounters the dragon of chaos, because obviously Leviathan is a dragon, and defeats it and feeds the people as a consequence. Well, we are hunting creatures after all, and in order to establish our place in the world, we had to go out there and conquer the dragons of the wilderness. You might wonder, why does a dragon breathe fire? Well, there's a bunch of reasons as far as I can tell. Fire is awe-inspiring. Fire and a terrible predator are the same thing because they both inspire awe. Fire is transforming. What's a good metaphor for being bitten by a poisonous snake? Well, have you ever seen the wounds that a poisonous snake produces if you're bitten by them? It's like someone took your arm and incinerated it. And so the idea that a snake has fiery breath is, well, let's call it close enough from a metaphorical perspective. Now, God is claiming to Job that he's the spirit that clears the wilderness and then builds order out of chaos, and because he's the embodiment of that spirit in some sense, Job has no reason to ever question his moral decisions. It's something like that in the story of Job. But the point, that point we'll leave aside because it's a more complicated issue. The point is that writers of the Bible are trying to dream up a representation of the spirit of civilization. That's the right way to think about it. You can think of Yahweh as the spirit of civilization. And what is that? Well, it's the thing that encounters the wilderness and makes habitable order, but then it's also the spirit of the order itself. And that's, I think, why in Christianity there's a representation of God the Father, because he's a representation of the culture that's generated after the chaos is ordered, right? You have the spirit that goes out into chaos and orders, and then you have the spirit of the order, and then the spirit of the order and the spirit of the ordering principle have to figure out how to coexist. That's partly what the Egyptians were trying to figure out, right? Between the culture and the spirit that generates the culture. And then you might also ask, should the culture be superordinate, or should the spirit that generates the culture be superordinate? And the answer seems to be, that the spirit that generates the culture should be superordinate to the spirit of the culture. It's something like that. And that's also why I think that one of the brilliant discoveries, let's say, of Western individualistic civilization is that the group is there to serve the individual, because the individual is the thing that revivifies the group. So we'll each depend on the other integrally. But if you subordinate the individual to the group, then the group stagnates and dies. And so that's a very bad long-term strategy, even though the group and belonging to the group is clearly necessary. You need to uphold the values of the group, but the values of the group should be subordinated to producing the individual who gives the group vision. And it's not a mere arbitrary supposition.
The Bible is certainly the greatest book ever written. It's not a book, it's a library. 66 or 72 books. What I'd like to do is focus on the book of Job, because it's the classic answer to the classic problem, the problem of evil. And if this is God's inspired word, it is the closest we can get to God's answer to the problem of evil, which is the strongest argument for atheism and the strongest argument against religious faith. So what I'll do this time is not so much give you a philosophical analysis or argument
or overview as go through this book itself and comment on it in a kind of what the Hebrew tradition calls midrash, or spiritual interpretation. The overall story is well known. Job is a good and righteous man who suffers, apparently meaninglessly and apparently unjustly, and his faith is severely tested. He comes close to the edge, but he preserves his faith in the end, and is justly rewarded. That's the plot, and therefore the beginning and the ending is the most interesting part, the dramatic part. Most of the poetry in between is, to the modern mind, rather boring and repetitious, because the modern mind doesn't like poetry very much. Our poets are usually self-indulgent aesthetes who talk to each other in unintelligible ways. Poetry is not a popular occupation in our society, as it has been in almost every other society in history. So the poetic...
Wait a second. Let's stop for a second. He just don't get it. Poetry is popular. They just add music to it. It's called music now, or rap, which is poetry to a beat. Carry on.
Sections are not the modern cup of tea, but the philosophical and theological sections are, and that's what I'm going to emphasize. So we begin at the beginning. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. Now you have to accept the author's presupposition. It's very easy to take the three friends' point of view and say, well, if God is just, there must be some reason for God permitting these horrible things to happen to Job. He must have deserved it. There must be some hidden sin there. That seems reasonable. But it's not true. Here's data. Job is a saint. Job does not deserve the stuff that he's going to receive. So why does he receive it? By the way, it's unknown whether there was a Job or not, whether the book is totally fictional or whether there was a Job. The land of Uz is, I believe, not mentioned anywhere else in the Bible. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But it doesn't matter, because there are many people who are very much like Job. Millions of them. Many of them are saints. Saints, by definition, are good. Saints suffer enormously. They don't deserve it. Why do they suffer? Why do bad things happen to good people? Rabbi Kushner's book title, very good title to a not very satisfying book, but a very honest book. Well, the book is written in a mythic form, a larger-than-life form, which is not to be taken literally, I think, like the creation story. The creation story is true and historical. There was an Adam and an Eve, but whether it was an apple, whether it was a literal fruit, whether there was a literal talking snake, whether God literally walked hand in hand with Adam and Eve in the garden before the fall or not, is not important. The things symbolized by these mythic symbols are the point that the author is trying to get across. So this is truth, but not literal scientific truth. So we have a kind of interview between God and Satan. The word Satan means the accuser or the enemy. Satan is the enemy of God. He can't conquer God, but he's also the enemy of us, and he can conquer us. Now, there was a day when the sons of God, angels, came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came among them. The Lord said to Satan, "Where have you come from?" And Satan answered, "From going back and forth on the earth."
Hey, let's review me.
Yes, take you as you breathe. Round of your shoulders. For the reclining butterfly pose, feet together, knees apart. And then take to flap the knees out, getting deeper into your inner back stretch. your shoulders. For the reclining butterfly pose, feet together, knees apart. Another thing to flop the knees out, getting deeper into your and begin to extend through your total body. Let me stay here as you breathe. Round of your shoulders. For the reclining butterfly pose, feet together, knees apart. Another thing to flop the knees out, getting deeper into your middle back stretch.
The ark, which is the portal to God, is to be carried on the shoulders of those who are holy. It is not to be touched. To touch the ark is to risk death. The Ark of the Covenant was a lidded, gold-leafed wooden chest containing the 2 stone tablets of the 10 Commandments. According to various texts within the Hebrew Bible, it also contained Aaron's rod and a pot of manna. God was said to have spoken with Moses from between the 2 cherubim on the ark's cover. The biblical account states that the ark was created a year after the Israelite exodus from Egypt, according to a pattern given to Moses by God at the foot of Mount Sinai. Thereafter, the gold-plated acacia chest was carried by its staves while en route by the Levites in advance of the people when on the march towards the Promised Land, or at the head of the Israelite army. In transport, the ark was concealed under a large veil made of skins and blue cloth, carefully hidden even from the eyes of the priests and the Levites who carried it. When at rest, a portable building, the tabernacle, meaning residence or dwelling place, was set up to house the ark. It was built of woven layers of curtains along with 48 boards clad with polished gold, standing like vertical blinds. Solomon's temple in Jerusalem superseded it as the dwelling place of God some 300 years later. There has to be a bridge between the finite and the infinite. There has to be a place where the ephemeral meets the eternal. There has to be a bridge between the knowable and the unknowable. And there has to be bedrock at the foundation. The ark, which is the portal to God, is to be carried on the shoulders of those who are holy. It is not to be touched. To touch the ark is to risk death. There are holy things that cannot be touched except at mortal risk. Those things that cannot be touched are at the very foundation of the community. The ark must be placed at the center of the temple. The temple must be placed at the center of the community. The community must be arranged around what is untouchable and unshakable. The untouchable and unshakable is what is axiomatic. The people following the ark have determined to journey together toward the eternal promised land. The city arranged properly around the ark of the
If you want to get more flexible, stretch every day. Here is a gently guided 15-minute flow with me, flow with Addie. Breathe and enjoy. Block assisted puppy pose. Stack both blocks.
faith is not just an intellectual gymnastic. Faith is a personal commitment and a trust in Christ, a response to his love, to his warming our hearts with his love.
I must say that's not the picture I get of God from the Old Testament. I want to talk about gospel reliability, but perhaps we should do this in order.
Good.
Even Christians today will speak as if the God of the Old Testament is like a different character. There's the God of the Old Testament, and there's Jesus. And they're kind of the same, but the God of the Old Testament is Yahweh, and Jesus is Yahweh, but like they talk about them differently. And I suppose the first question is, can you understand why, at least, people are doing that? If you read the Old Testament and you see a much more military, jealous, apparently vindictive, one who regrets things, one who seems to physically sort of walk amongst sort of the Garden of Eden, but is also sort of really far away, but is also kind of localized in a temple. And then you have this Jesus figure, the meek and mild, the endlessly loving, the impossible to picture as anything other than just like love and softness and beautiful. Can you understand why people see these
Sure.
as incompatible?
Sure. But I hope God is jealous. I hope you're jealous. If you have children and they're starting to entertain the friendship of a drug dealer, I hope that you're going to be jealous for your child's attention and loyalty. And when you see a drug dealer begin to weasel his way into their lives and suck them into drug addiction, I hope that you will have a selfless jealousy where you will seek to win your child back. I hope you'll be angry at times with a righteous indignation. I mean, if I beat you up and steal your wallet, the police come in, because these guys call the police. Stewart calls the police. And the police say, Cliff, you beat up Alex. You stole his wallet. Now let's go to Starbucks. Well, that's ridiculous. Moral outrage is appropriate. Why? Because injustice is horrendous. Well, the same people who object to that will say, oh, well, God's just loving and forgiving. Oh, no, no, no. God in both the Old Testament and the New Testament is angry about evil. Good gracious. Jesus took a whip of cords and drove the religious hypocrites out of the temple. And the bloodiest book in the Bible is not in the Old Testament, it's in the New Testament. The last book of the New Testament, book of Revelation. The blood flows like no other place in the Bible. So the Bible's very consistent. God has a righteous jealousy, righteous anger, but he's a God of mercy and grace. And yes, he will judge, and Jesus said, I'm going to be the one to judge you.
Let's talk about that righteous anger, because I think righteous is the operative word there. You know, if you were to beat me up, you would start attacking me. And
Yes.
these fine people called the police, and the police showed up.
Yep.
And said, what are you doing? But then it actually transpired that I was your slave, and the Book of Exodus clearly states that if you beat up your slave, as long as they get up after a few days, you're not to be punished. And they say, oh, well, sorry to disturb you, gentlemen, and they go to Starbucks. Right? You see what I'm saying? The righteous part is important here, right? The commands that God is giving, the things that he's angry.
Hold on. This is the whole issue. Let's pause this right now. Alex O'Connor. Because I hear so many people fighting over slavery in the Bible when you talk about the Old Testament versus the New Testament. The Old Testament is the actual building of a civilization. Slaves were someone, basically, I captured you in battle. You from a rival tribe, you who might not speak my language, have my customs, do anything like I do. You who I might have killed your brother, cousin, sister, daughter, in order to have land that you and I both believe we have claim to, because this happened thousands and thousands and thousands upon thousands of years ago. And there were no lands, deeds, titles, there were no police. So anytime you took someone alive, you're taking responsibility for keeping them alive. Because at any point, that person that you don't know, that doesn't owe you anything, could come after anyone that you love. And you're feeding this person. Sometimes we look through the crimes of when humanity has tried to rise a unfortunate necessity. And then we compare the two, like modern chattel slavery, where it was systematized, is very much different than ancient biblical slavery, where different types of beings were emerging. We had Nephilim and everything else. So yeah, sometimes you need laws, and you needed a rule book to teach people. And in this case, you had to teach former slaves who had just gotten out of being in slavery, who had been treated by their masters. And so they needed a way to learn how to actually be slave masters themselves. We underestimate what it's like to go from having no responsibility to having all responsibility. But that is what happened when Moses decided to help and listen to the call of God. So Alex O'Connor, that's why slavery exists in the Bible, and why in the Old Testament, where a lot of the world is being founded, is a lot different than the New Testament, where Jesus Christ is here as the Son of God, the physical body of man, with the direct connection, the spiritual, ethereal connection with God. And he has the day of his birth. Folks have been showing up, bringing them gold, incense, and myrrh, teaching them things, and he got to live in that light from the moment, and in a world where everything was safe, safe-ish. It's a lot different when there's civilizations, kings, rulers, folks can track you down, and star systems have been built. That's thousands of years to get to Jesus, as opposed to the stories of Abraham, and Isaac, and Jacob, and where they were literally getting it out the mud. And when you're getting it out the mud with a bunch of other people that's getting it out the mud, the same language, sometimes you got to take some people to be some free labor.
About the things that he demands of the nation of Israel seem to run contrary to a lot of our moral intuitions. Now, perhaps we can start by talking about the slavery thing. Right?
Yes.
I understand that the word slavery is a promiscuous term that can mean lots of different things. When you say slavery, people immediately think of antebellum American South slavery, right? The kind of slavery that appears in the Hebrew Bible is going to be very different. And it's going to vary depending on what kind of slaves you're talking about. There will be indentured servants. There will be, and also it's a different kind of society where people literally cannot survive except insofar as being a servant of a house. And there are rules about what you can do and what you can't do. But it does seem at the very least that the Hebrew Bible, we can perhaps begin with this as a premise, does not condemn, in principle, the ownership of other human beings as private property. Would you disagree with that?
Yes.
So, where the Hebrew Bible says things like,
Where the Hebrew Bible,
if he gets up after a day or two,
where the Hebrew Bible says things like, he says all this stuff with this very proper tone, but then he doesn't think about what life would have been like a few thousand years ago, and you got to sleep and live next to this person, and ain't no police force, ain't no jails. Y'all live in tents. Whatever you can tie or hold this person down with. And they gotta be there for however long y'all gotta live together for the rest of that slave's life. That slave who also might be dreaming about getting home free. And so the rules are basically they're trying to give some guidelines for people who had been slaves and probably been treated rough as slaves by some of the Egyptians. Because remember, Moses had actually killed an Egyptian officer who was handling a slave. So while at the same time acknowledging it's different, but at the same time you have to realize what the life is like. Try to get a good night's sleep with somebody you just had a war with. In the next tent over from you.
You're not to be, the slave owner is not to be punished because the slave is his property. And where he says,
and see, that's where he's trying to do with his property. He's trying to turn it into property rights instead of understanding that it's a safety issue. It became property when antebellum slavery used people that they went and purchased, and just like we importing some stuff. It's different than, hey, look, we just got done. We both like this land. We both gonna be here. One of us gonna work and one of us gonna run the shop, but we all gonna eat. That's the conversation.
your male and female slaves may come from the nations around you. From them you may buy and sell slaves. You may also purchase some of the temporary residents living among you and members of their clan. But you must not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly. Clearly here, we're dealing with the ownership of other human beings as private property. Clearly God is legislating in such a way, sometimes seeming as not to condemn it there and then, and sometimes saying, you may do this. And I wonder if he's not at least implicitly condoning that. But what is he doing in those verses?
He's giving instruction, not approval. He's giving regulation, not affirmation of it. And the key to this is what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 19, when he's asked, what about divorce?
Right.
And Jesus points out, yeah, divorce is wrong. Well, then why did Moses say, give your wife a certificate of divorce and send her on her way? And Jesus says something fascinating. He says, Moses permitted this because your hearts were hard. Gets right back to the book of Job. We live in an unfair, cursed, messed up world. And unfortunately, if there's been adultery, divorce is permissible before God. But that is not the way it was from the beginning. From Genesis 2:24, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother, be united to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So remember, those laws in the Old Testament are instructions, not approval, regulations, not endorsement.
I have heard this response before, right? The idea is that there are two ways to look at this. One is to say, well, actually, God was perfectly okay with it, but it just wasn't as bad as you think. And one way is to say, actually, it is pretty bad, but God's not okay with it, right? For example, in the book of Exodus, where the law of God says if you have a Hebrew slave, he's to go free after 7 years. If he has a wife, when he comes to you, then the wife goes free too. But if, while he's your slave, he takes a wife and has children, the wife and children stay with you. You don't get to go with them. If, however, it says the man decides that he loves his wife, and he loves his children, and he loves his master, as if those three have to come together. Maybe he just loves his wife and kids. Well, he can stay with them.
Do you hear all this work that somebody's trying to put together a puzzle, and he's negating the fact that these were real people having to figure out real problems in real time. And this is them just writing down what they were doing as best as they could, or keeping track through the stories being told. The way they want to backwards engineer it is that everything was done on purpose in order to set up. It's like, no. People were dealing with stuff. It's growth of technology. That's what the Bible is a growth of story of civilization through human technology. Adam is the story of the first farmer. He named the animals, started subduing the earth. Generation after generation added on. Cain and Abel was the story of one was, people think of it as Cain wasn't doing his job. It's like, no. This was actually a bunch of folks that are discovering farming and discovering herding from being hunter-gatherer. So one is raising food, meat, and the other is raising, grain. And of course, if you've been a hunter gatherer, well, that meat's gonna taste still a lot better than that grain. It ain't saying that it ain't doing the best. It's just that right now, it ain't as good as the meat. The way that we keep trying to characterize it is that Cain was being punished. And maybe he was being punished, but I don't think he was being punished because, hey, he sucked at what he was doing. He was being punished because, and that's why he was like, I don't understand. I'm doing everything right. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. And so he's just pissed because of that. And a lot of us happen to do that. But when you listen to these folks, they're trying to ascribe some higher, greater, bigger thing to a man who's just now learning about agriculture, trying to taste between one son's job is to do the animals and the other son's job is to do the vegetables, and he's trying to see, hey, what's this good? And this all turns out later on. This is relevant when you see that Jacob is able to, or Joseph or Jacob, is able to overcome years of famine by breeding the cattle. Basically, you store your grain in your walk-in storage facility called a cow or a sheep or something. Then you eat that during times of famine or during times of where the weather is making it so things can't grow. But a lot of this stuff is not as complicated as these folks want to make it out to be. I love Jordan Peterson. I like Alex O'Connor. I love Alex O'Connor, and I enjoy his content. I love Jordan Peterson's content. However, you see that sometimes people are just making things a bit more complicated than it needs to be. Sometimes people are trying to find a foreshadowing instead of seeing that the beginning part was just the recording. And the reason why the end, Jesus' life, reflected on so many of the stuff in the beginning is because he had spent most of his life reading or learning, I should say, those things that happened before him in the tribe of Israel. And so sometimes we want to ascribe a grand narrative because we're standing outside instead of just imagining what it would have been like inside as a baby born in a manger, but having people show up to give you gifts. It's a beautiful thing.
But in doing so, he's taken somewhere, he has his ear pierced like cattle, and then he remains a slave
Like cattle.
for life in order that he can be with his wife and children. Now, I understand the idea that maybe God, for some reason, couldn't abolish slavery. Maybe the society just couldn't do without it. Whatever the reason may be, it seems to me that it wouldn't have been too much to ask for God to say, if he has a wife and children, then when he goes free, his wife and kids should go with him. Because I'm a God who believes in the family, I believe in marriage, I believe in sort of the proper upraising of children, and so if you're going to let that man go, it's a real priority that his wife and kids go with him. But no, instead, for some reason, that's not allowed. So in other words, if it were just the case that...
Again, this is a dumb person who sounds smart. He act like they live in the world he live in right now where we got police, jails, systems, education. I can let you free, but I'm gonna keep them right here. You can go work for somebody else and do whatever you want, but the ones you love that I still own gonna be right here, so that you don't get no big crazy ideas about trying to get your get back, because you now have access to tools and weapons and things like that, because you are not in my sight and care 100% of the time. He again Alex O'Connor, is trying to look at Old Testament God trying to keep his people alive in a land where it is completely lawless, to New Testament Jesus, who is trying to teach people how to live in the way now that civilization has built up systems around humanity, so that we're not having to engage in constant battles with our livestock. There are people that handle livestock. And that was literally Abraham's job in the beginning. Shepherd. David, shepherd. Jesus, verbal shepherd. People are his sheep. He said it multiple times, not the name. So I'm still listening to Alex O'Connor and trying to find something within reason. Again, I enjoy your content, buddy.
But we had a list of commands where God said, listen, if you're going to beat your slave, then this is going to happen. Then fine. Maybe he's trying to sort of ready us.
See, the way that he sees God is he both wants to have God as puppet master and God as, as the source. When he wants to be mad at God, why isn't God doing the things that I want? But he's like on a platform with internets and TV. Dude, you breathe. God made air so Alex O'Connor can breathe. Just say thank you. If you're trying to figure out what is God or who is God, why don't you say, hey, maybe God is the algorithm of all the elements. Physical, ethereal, and those that we don't even know. God created the proton, the neutron, the electron, and the Higgs boson. And things that are smaller and things that are much larger, and everything in between. God is the creator, the architect, the maker, the cast iron. God is. And so when you aren't afraid to be able to acknowledge God, to see God, to talk to God, to respect God, and at times fear what God can do, but not fear God. Because the light of creation is alive within each of us. And so many different religions want to tell us the same thing, which is that little grain of a mustard seed of faith that God puts into each of us is what helps carry us forward as a civilization.
For an abolitionist world. But there are a lot of cases where he seems not to do that.
So once again, must read in context. All right? So you've got Genesis 1. God creates us in his image, male and female. We all have equal dignity. Second greatest miracle in the Old Testament. God frees the Hebrew slaves from Egypt. Luke 4, first sermon of Jesus. He almost loses his life because he communicates to Jews God loves Gentiles just as much as he does you Jews. Best known parable, Luke chapter 10, parable of the Good Samaritan. Jesus makes a direct frontal attack on racism as he tells how a Samaritan gets down on his hands and knees and cleans up the cuts and bandages the wounds of a Jew. Galatians 3:28. In Christ there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free. Very clearly, the first century Church of Jesus Christ was committed to slavery as unacceptable.
Well, that's interesting because, Cliff, I wonder if you know what you've just committed yourself to. I didn't know that you were also a woke gender abolitionist. Because I often hear people quote this particular verse. They say, look, I know that God seemed to suggest that he was sort of maybe pro-slavery, but look, we have it in the scripture. There is neither slave nor free, for we're all one in Christ. Well, it also says there's no male or female. There's no male, no female, no slave, no free, no Jew, no Gentile, for we're all one in Jesus. If we're supposed to interpret that as God condemning the earthly practice of slavery, because there is no slave and there is no master, well, he also says there is no male and there is no female. So is God also a gender abolitionist? I would say, I mean, I don't want to guess your position, I don't think you'd believe that. If that's the case, then the fact that God is saying that there's no male, although there's male and female on earth, of course, in Christ we're all one. Even though there's male and female on earth, in Christ we're all one. And so if we're going to interpret that way, I think we also have to say, even though, of course, on earth there's slave and master, of course, but we're all one in Christ. In other words, I think this might be a reaffirmation of the earthly practice of slavery.
Well, I would take it totally different. I would take it that Stephen Carter, who teaches at Yale Law School, a black intellectual, is absolutely correct when he points out the demographic that has the highest percentage of followers of Christ in the world is women of color.
Mm-hmm.
And the demographic in the United States that has the highest percentage of followers of Christ is black women. Yeah, women get it. There is nobody who has elevated the position of women as much as Jesus Christ has. And then when you keep on reading Paul, you get to the letter of Philemon, and he's asking a slaveholder, Philemon, to accept his runaway slave Onesimus back, no longer as a slave, but as a brother in Christ. So I think it's abundantly clear that God is totally against slavery, and it's abundantly clear that God is against chauvinism and sexism and women being degraded by men.
And over 60% of atheists worldwide are white male. And just about every single humanist conference year round is all represented by white Western.
Now that's funny. I've seen this before. There was a great debate with Tom Holland and A.C. Grayling where they're talking about whether Western values are ultimately Christian. And there's kind of
I can kill this feed.